I think we'll make a start now, and people can join when I'm doing the introductions. So, as I said, we're delighted to welcome you all to this evening's lecture with Dr. Louise Fenton, Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm, the Worcestershire murder mystery. And we're also thrilled to welcome Louise back and to host another of her fascinating lectures. And thank you ever so much for joining us. Tonight is a sort of cloudier night, so we were hoping that people wouldn't be lured into their gardens. My name is Paula Harrison and I'm the coordinator of University Centre Telford. We're part of the University of Wolverhampton and we're based in the heart of Telford in Shropshire. And we would normally hold our public lecture programme in our centre in Telford, but because of the current pandemic, we've moved all our lectures online, and they've been hugely successful, attracting a global audience. Now, before I introduce Louise formally, there's just a couple of housekeeping things I wanted to explain. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the lecture via the Q&A button. If you're using a laptop or a desktop, the icon is on the bottom of your screen in the middle. And if you're using a mobile, it will be in the top right-hand corner. And just to remind you that Zoom is a public platform and the lecture is being recorded, so please be mindful about sharing any personal information. Louise is a cultural historian, illustrator and writer. She has a BA and an MA in illustration from the University of Wolverhampton, and she completed her PhD on the representations of voodoo at the University of Warwick in 2010. Louise is now a senior lecturer in contextual studies. Her recent research is focused on the visual and literary representations of otherness and the social history of witchcraft, voodoo and zombies. And Louise has done all those themes for us in her lectures, and we're delighted to welcome you back again tonight, Louise. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Well, good evening, everybody. If you haven't attended these before, just to let you know, I can't see you at all. So you can have your feet up and a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or whatever it is you want to do, because I cannot see you. And I apologise if I laugh at my own jokes as well. I find them funny and you may not, but I'm not aware of it anyway. So as Paula said, I'm Louise Fenton. Before I start, I'd like to thank Paula and the team at University Centre Telford for hosting these talks. It's a lovely way to share my research and also to introduce some of the topics to audiences. So I'm an academic at the University of Wolverhampton. My research really covers quite a broad area, but primarily I focus on witchcraft, Haitian voodoo, New Orleans voodoo, the occult, the paranormal, and everything around those. I became interested in Bella in the Wych Elm due to a witchcraft link, but I find the story fascinating and I keep going back to it, so I'd like to share it with you this evening. The overview of the talk is that I'm going to start with the facts of the case. So we'll go through where it happened, when, and how things have developed over the years. We'll look at the graffiti that's appeared and repeatedly appears, some of the newspaper headlines, the main theories around who she may have been and what may have happened to her. I'll also look at dispelling some of the stories that have circulated over the decades. I'll suggest some reading if it's an area that you'd like to pursue further or look into, and we'll end with the Q&A. So if anything springs to mind, please pop it in the Q&A box and we'll answer at the end. If any of you want to email me personally, that's absolutely fine, and my email address is on the screen right now. It's just louise.fenton@wlv.ac.uk. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find me there. But please do contact me. I'm absolutely happy and fine to answer any questions if you forget to ask them during this session. The talk itself will last about 25 minutes to half an hour, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the story of the Worcestershire murder mystery, Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm. So this incident took place in Hagley, Worcestershire. This map shows the location of Hagley Wood right in the middle, and you can just make out where it says Bella's skeleton found here, and there's an arrow. This is in an area on the edge of the Clent Hills. It's on an area called Witchbury Hill, which is on Hagley Park, which belongs to Hagley Hall Estate. But there are lots of public footpaths in this area, and you can still walk through Hagley Woods today and walk around Witchbury Hill. It's very close to Stourbridge, Kidderminster. It's on the outskirts of Birmingham, and you can see Halesowen marked on the map as well. So it's not too far from here. And as I said, you can still walk around the woodland area and up Witchbury Hill. During World War II, on the 18th of April 1943, 4 teenage boys were in these woods, in Hagley Woods. Now, depending on what you read, some accounts say that they were looking for birds' eggs, which was quite a popular pastime. Some say they were poaching for rabbits to try and feed their families because it was wartime. And they were all around 17 years old. The woods they were in belonged at the time to Lord Cobham as part of Hagley Hall Estate. So they were actually trespassing. And that does go some way to explain what happened next. The boys were Bob Hart, Tom Willits, Fred Payne and Bob Farmer. And as I said, they were all around 17 years old. As they were walking through these woods, they came across this very tree. They spotted this tree, and it was known as a Wych Elm. They decided to climb up into it to see if there were any birds' nests inside that they could get the eggs from. And it was Bob Farmer who climbed up. He climbed up, and in the middle there was a hollow. And when he looked down into the hollow, he could see something white shining. Putting his hand down, he pulled out the object, and it was a skull. At first, he thought it was an animal, but quickly realised it was human. Absolutely terrified, he dropped it back into the hollow inside the tree. The boys fled, and they promised each other not to tell a soul about their findings for fear of getting into trouble. So they were more concerned about the fact they were trespassing and could be in serious trouble than actually thinking that they've just found a skull. The skull they had found still had some hair and flesh on it. The mouth had very crooked teeth, and despite the promise that the boys had made to each other, Tom Willits was too stressed and too pressured by what had happened, and he confessed to his parents about what they'd found in the woods. He told his parents exactly where and what had happened, and they called the police. Within a very short time, the whole area was swarming with police, and they cordoned off this tree, and on closer examination found the skeleton of a woman lodged inside. Inside the trunk, she was in a curled up position, so her knees were up to her chest, and she was quite skeletal. The bones of one of her hands, however, were scattered around the tree, and this is significant later in the story. She was wearing an imitation gold ring, which they believe was a fake wedding ring. She had scraps of clothing still hung on her bones. She was wearing a striped knitted cardigan, a cloth skirt and a light blue belt, which was still on her. A very short distance away from the tree, the police found some blue shoes. They were like blue suede with a crepe sole. But more significantly, a piece of taffeta or satin fabric had been stuffed inside her mouth, deep into her throat, which indicated that she'd been suffocated. The medical examiner was Professor James Webster, and Professor Webster concluded that the woman was around 35 years old. She had irregular teeth in her upper jaw, which you can see in the image on the right. These are actually photographs of the skull that was found in the Wych Elm and of the teeth and the jaw on the right. So you can see they're quite distinctive. She had light brown hair and was just 5 feet tall. He determined that she had given birth at some point in her life and that she'd been dead for around 18 months. So this put the time of death at around the summer of 1941. And what's interesting, once police files were opened up more recently, in July 1941, at around the suggested time of death, which was summer 1941, there had been a report of a man heard a woman screaming in the woods. And he contacted the police. They did a search and they couldn't find anything. But if you think if that screaming was the murder of this woman and she'd been stuffed inside the tree, it's highly unlikely they would have looked there. Professor Webster was absolutely convinced that this was murder. At the time, he stated, and I'm going to quote this from his words, I cannot imagine a woman accidentally slipping in there. Neither do I think it's reasonable for a woman to crawl into that place to commit suicide. And the fact she got satin that had been forcibly placed down her throat and into her mouth also indicated that this wasn't something that could have occurred by accident. He concluded that she'd also been put in the tree shortly after death, before rigor mortis set in. Now, rigor mortis would set in fairly quickly, so he felt that she was also murdered very close to the tree where she was found, because there wouldn't be time to actually carry her to the location and stuff her into the tree trunk. And the fact that this concealment had taken place of both the murder and obviously the body, he felt that the murderer must have local knowledge of the area. They must be aware that this tree existed, or the woodland. Due to the very distinctive nature of her teeth in her upper jaw, police contacted every dentist in the area and beyond in the hope of identifying her through her distinctive teeth and on dental records. They started with the local area and then spread it out nationally, but they had no luck whatsoever. They also went through over 3,000 missing person files, but this was wartime. Bombs were being dropped on Birmingham, which is a city very close to Hagley, and the bombs were dropping at such a rate, people were being killed in Birmingham itself, and they were fleeing to these outlying towns and villages where they felt they were safe. And of course, they were missing anyway, or they were assumed dead in the bombing. So it was very difficult to trace missing people at this time. But neither of these lines of inquiry, either for her teeth or for missing persons, produced any leads whatsoever. The one thing they did manage to trace were the shoes, and they managed to trace all but 6 owners of these pairs of shoes, and they were sold in a market in Dudley. So that's the only lead they had. And at the time, this was known as the tree murder riddle. Time passed and the case was overshadowed by the numerous tragedies of war. So over the next 4 or 5 months, things did go quite quiet. Then about 6 months later, graffiti began to appear. The first message, found in December 1943, so just a few months after the murder, read, "Who put Lubella down the Wych Elm?" This was the first time a name had been associated with the woman found, and over the following months and then years, graffiti continued to appear. It was believed to be written by the same person in the 1940s, during that period when it was appearing. It was quite high up on walls, and on many occasions it was believed to be an adult's writing, and the writing was actually very similar in every instance. This is one example of the graffiti that was appearing in the area. This one says address was opposite Rose and Crown, and then you can't quite make out the last bit. Hagley Wood, Lubella. So this followed on from the first one, which said who put Lubella in the Wych Elm. 2 more examples written in chalk on buildings from around the area. The name now had changed from Lubella to just Bella. And this is the name that has stuck. So we still refer to her as Bella. So the one on the left, who put Bella down the Wych Elm? Hagley Wood, was on the side of a pub. I think that one was in Old Hill. And the one on the right is who put Bella down the Wych Elm? Hagley Wood. Very similar type of writing. The nation was absolutely gripped by this story. And it's not surprising, really. There are mysterious messages appearing all over the area. There's a murder victim who is unidentified. And this whole story, which was evolving in the press as well, gave way to many, many theories. I just wanted to show this now because this is one of the most well-known graffiti examples. And this was painted onto the Hagley obelisk, which is up on Wychbury Hill. And the word witch here, which is spelled W-Y-C-H, has been changed to the more familiar witch, W-I-T-C-H. Now, some of the graffiti did have W-I-T-C-H on the messages, but it didn't happen very often. I would say probably 90% or more of the time is W-Y-C-H. This graffiti was removed. And in around, I think it was about 2006, this appeared in the late 1990s, about 1999, it was there, and the owners decided to actually wash it off. So it was removed about 2006, I believe. But the implication of all of this graffiti is that someone knew who killed the woman we now know as Bella. The story begins to evolve a little bit more. And during World War II, several German spies were captured in the area. And then in 1953, a new line of inquiry opened up, the possibility of war espionage. I am going to talk a little bit more about espionage in a moment, but I'm going to mention it now because this is 1953. And in the Wolverhampton Express and Star, a letter was received by somebody just identifying herself as Anna of Claverley. The letter is difficult to read, but I have got a transcript of it, so I can read it out to you from left to right. Dear Quaestor, and I'll explain who Quaestor was in a moment. Finish your articles, read the Wych Elm crime by all means, and this is 10 years after Bella was found. They are interesting to your readers, but you will never solve the mystery. The one person who would give the answer is now beyond the jurisdiction of earthly courts. The affair is closed and involves no witches, black magic, or moonlight rites. Much as I hate having to use a nom de plume, I think you would appreciate if you knew me. The only clues I can give you are that the person responsible for the crime died insane in 1942, and the victim was Dutch and arrived illegally in England in about 1941. I have no wish to recall any more. You can then see there's a paragraph that's been scribbled out, and in the police notes, it's noted that they feel this is nothing to do with the Hagley Woods murder. I'm not so sure, and I haven't been able to decipher, so if any of you can, that would be wonderful. I've got as far as the first sentence says, I am no hoaxer. What happened to our mutual friend, ... I just can't read those last few words. Yours sincerely, Anna. Now, at the time, a reporter called Wilfred Byford Jones went by the pen name of Quaestor. He interviewed Anna, in inverted commas, as she claimed that she knew Bella and she knew who she was, and that she was a member of a spy ring active in the area. Anna was identified eventually as Una Mossop, and she claimed her RAF pilot husband, Jack Mossop, witnessed Bella's death. First of all, she claimed that her husband told her that he was involved in a spy ring with a Dutchman called Van Ralt. And one evening, Van Ralt was in a car with a woman he believed to be Bella, and he got in the car with him. He then said that Van Ralt strangled the woman because of her spy associations. Now, there is suspicion that Wilfred Byford Jones, or Quaestor, actually penned this letter, because the turn of phrase when he talks about the earthly courts, note the jurisdiction of earthly courts, and he also mentions using a nom de plume, are not the usual language that would have been used by a housewife in the West Midlands in the 1940s. So there is a lot of suspicion that he wrote this letter. However, these theories are still floating around. So the other one, another version of this story, has Mossop and Van Ralt drinking with Bella in a local pub. And apparently she got very drunk, and they thought it would be a bit of a prank to teach her a lesson, and so they put her in the tree drunk because she was unconscious. But she was unable to climb out, and that's where she died. But neither of these stories explain how she had fabric stuffed into her mouth and her throat. So what is known about Jack Mossop, the RAF pilot, is that he died in St George's Hospital, Stafford, before Bella's body was discovered. In notes, it's written that he allegedly had recurring nightmares of a skull that was stuffed inside a tree, which led to his mental breakdown and his incarceration at the hospital. The man called Van Ralt was never found, and the story could not be substantiated. And it's got to be considered that this came from a wife who was estranged. Obviously, her husband had died, and she told this story 12 years after Bella was found. And the 1950s was a time of the Cold War, of James Bond, of spy thrillers. And so there is that element of sensationalism within the story. So I'm leaving all of this to your own decision. You can come to your own conclusions. There have been repeated calls for witnesses over the years, and newspapers have run the story. The Independent, the BBC Radio have constantly put the story out and asked for witnesses or any new leads. This, for example, is a drawing that went out in a newspaper in 1968, and it shows the clothing that she was found in. So the top one is a piece of fabric from the skirt. The bottom one is a drawing of the cardigan she was wearing. The police also did a detailed drawing with information in 1968, which went into press. And this gives a drawing, this is a police impression of what Bella would have looked like when she was wearing her clothes, the style of clothes that she was wearing, and a very clear description. She had irregularity in her teeth, brown hair, knitted cardigan, blue belt, aged about 35, mock wedding ring, cloth skirt, blue crepe-soled shoes, peach-coloured taffeta underskirt, which it's believed that that's the fabric that was in her mouth, and she's about 5 foot tall. In 2018, a team from Liverpool John Moores University used these photographs of the skull and the jaw to create a digital impression of how she might look today. This was led by Professor Caroline Wilkinson, and she created this image of Bella. She was the expert that recreated the face of Richard III as well when the royal remains were found. She could not use the actual skull for Bella, as the skull is now lost. But this is a very clear impression of what Bella would have looked like. And it makes her a human person, because people sometimes forget with these murder cases, the sensational takes over the human side. The files are now closed. They've been reopened and closed several times, and they're stored in Worcestershire archives at the Hive, if any of you ever want to go and look at them. And of course, MI5 files have now opened a lot more. So for the espionage side, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, they're open for that as well at the National Archives. So unless new information is uncovered, both the victim and her killer are both unlikely to be identified. DNA evidence, I've talked to people about this case before, and everybody says, well, we've got DNA now, why can't we test, why can't we find out who she was? And it is often used in cold cases and old cases, but unfortunately, the remains of Bella, the victim, are lost, totally lost. It's believed that after her post-mortem, Professor Webster gave her body, or the skeletal remains of her body, to a colleague at Birmingham University to run some more tests, which weren't particularly legal, I suppose, but they wanted to find out quite a lot more about her. So the police did look for her at one point. They did try and find her, and they were looking in a cemetery, and obviously she wasn't there. They then found out about this. So she could still be in a box in storage somewhere in Birmingham University with Bella on, labelled on the outside, or she may have been sent for burial somewhere else, but we just don't know. So her skeletal remains and her skull are now missing. Newspapers covered the story at the time, offering various headlines. This was just 10 days after, 11 days after, when they announced the murder verdict in the Wood mystery. And as I said, it was known as the Wood mystery for quite some time, rather than Bella and the Wych Elm. And this was where a verdict of murder against person or persons unknown was actually recorded. So it was officially a murder on April the 29th, 1943. In 1949, this was from the Birmingham Daily Gazette. It was called the Gypsy Wood murder, or the Gypsy Wood mystery. And the murder hunt had begun again. So 6 years after the original inquiry, it was reopened. And this is because local people started pointing the finger at gypsies, and I'll talk about that in a moment. It was believed there were gypsies staying in the wood at the time of the murder, and therefore it was a line of questioning. In 1968, it came up again. Murder by Witchcraft was published, written by Donald McCormick. I've mentioned him in previous talks. He wrote a book about Bella in the Wych Elm and also Charles Walton murders from Warwickshire in 1945. And it was in the Birmingham Daily Post from 20th of August 68 when this drawing first appeared of the police reconstruction of the skeleton Bella. And of course, we've now got associations of devil worship creeping in. There are a number of theories, and as recently as 2014, in a BBC Radio 4 broadcast, there was a suggestion that Bella may have been a prostitute who worked on the Hagley Road in Birmingham. There was a woman called Bella who went missing around 1941, and the timeline fits, but there was no evidence. And on looking further into the files, it appears that she was found a few days later at her home address with her parents. Locals also pointed the finger at the gypsies, as I've just said, and they were frequently used as scapegoats when people went missing, when things happened. It was point the finger at the gypsies. And they had camped out near Hagley Wood in 1941. So it was suggested that perhaps Bella was a gypsy who had been killed by her own community. Another suggestion is that she could have been a local barmaid killed by an American GI. There are a lot of American GIs in the area. And so that was another theory that's floated in some of the documents I've read. Or she could have just been a homeless woman with no loved ones to report her missing. But with all of these theories, it doesn't answer the question, how would she have got in the tree and how would she have had fabric stuffed into her mouth and her throat? There are two recurring theories, and the first one is linked to witchcraft, which is how my interest got sparked in the first place. In 1945, so just 2 years after the murder of Bella, and for those of you who came to my talk a few weeks ago, the murder of Charles Walton, which took place in 1945, Professor Margaret Murray, here on the left, a renowned anthropologist, suggested that the fact that Bella's hand was separate from her body indicated a hand of glory. And I've got a picture of a hand of glory on the right. But I have issue with this because, excuse me, I have a bit of an issue with the hand of glory because Margaret Murray is suggesting that it was through witchcraft. However, most of the accounts of the hand of glory, the whole process of a hand of glory is to sever the right hand of a criminal while the body is still hanging from gallows. And then the hand should be carefully pickled over a period of 2 weeks. And there are different tales for their use. Some of the tales I've read and some of the accounts I've read are that they are to aid burglars in their attempts to steal from people's homes. So if they try and light the fingers, which sounds horrific, but there is human fat in them, so they try and light them. If any finger refuses to light, that indicates that there's somebody awake in the house. On another account, it's believed that taking the hand into a house will cause everybody to go into a coma, so theft can take place. But they've also been documented as trying to prevent further grievances or to deter crime. But none of these accounts that I've read fit with the idea of Bella. She also suggested that it could be connected with the referred to as the witchcraft murder of Charles Walton, who was murdered in Lower Quinton in Warwickshire in 1945, because these links with witchcraft, he was killed with a pitchfork and a hook, and there are lots of accounts of covens working in the area and the links to witchcraft. There were links to witchcraft due to the fact that Bella's body was found entombed in a tree, which was indicative of a ritualistic slaying, and that she was executed for a crime against a coven. But again, none of these have been substantiated. Donald McCormick also linked the two murders in his book, Murder by Witchcraft, in 1968. So this perpetuated the idea and raised it in the public imagination. However, I will say the fact that the hand was away from the body has now been suggested that it's more likely to just be predatory animals pulling the bones out rather than anything to do with occult practices. And a word of caution, if you do read McCormick's book, he talks a lot about Margaret Murray, but she died before it was published, so she could never dispute what he said that she'd said. A lot of the facts he includes as well are not substantiated. Espionage. This is the other recurring theory, that Bella was in fact a German spy. McCormick mentions this in his book, suggesting that Bella had the code name Clara, and he claims that she was known as Clara Bella and that she parachuted into the area in 1941, but failed to make any radio contact and disappeared. Now, although there is no substantiation to McCormick's claims, he did touch on stories that have since appeared in other files. Rumours suggested that Bella may have been Clara Boyerle, girlfriend of the known German spy Josef Jacobs. Clara, on the left here, was a film star and a cabaret star. Josef Jacobs was a spy. He parachuted in and got caught. And when he was caught and interrogated, he was found with a photograph of both of them together. And he did confess that she was his lover. He was married, his wife was back in Germany, but Boyerle was his lover, and that she was well connected with senior Nazis and she was a secret agent. She was due to parachute into the West Midlands after Jacobs had made contact with her, but obviously he got caught straight away and that never happened. MI5 files that are now open show that Boyerle was around 35 in 1941, so she was the right age, but she was already working in Birmingham as a cabaret star, so the parachute theory doesn't really fit. Jacobs, worth mentioning, on the 15th of August, he was actually the last man to be put to death at the Tower of London, and he was executed by firing squad, seated on a chair. And if you're into morbid curiosities or the macabre, the chair that he was executed in is on display in the tower. So Jacobs has gone. So we have Clara Boyerle is often written as missing, that she did go missing at the time. So this story is stuck for quite a long time, and it's often repeated and slightly refined and reimagined, but it is one story that has stuck. She is the possibility of being Bella. However, I dispute this because Bella on the left was only 5 foot tall. Clara was known to be 6 foot. And these two photos show that there is very little similarity between the two of them. Additional recent research has already shown that and suggested that Clara Boyerle returned to Germany in 1941 in the summer, shortly after Jacobs was executed, and she died in Berlin at the end of the same year. This case continues to fascinate. These are just some of the factual accounts. And as I said, I would take the Donald McCormick one with a pinch of salt, but it is good read. It's only 180 pages. It's a short paperback. And it does cover the study of the Charles Walton murder in Lower Quinton, as well as the Bella murder in Hagley Woods. But that's Murder by Witchcraft by Donald McCormick. Under the Shadow of Meon Hill does the same thing. He looks at, that's by Paul Newman, and he looks at the Lower Quinton murder and the Hagley Wood murder. And then there's Bella in the Wychelm in Search of a Wartime Mystery by Andrew Spark, a much more recent one. But there is only so much information out there, and without being able to locate the skeleton or the skull, it's unlikely that anything is going to move forward. It's inspired much fiction as well. The Hollow Tree, which is by James Brogden, Tana French, The Wych Elm, that is a particularly good fiction book. It's a thriller. It's loosely built around the Wych Elm, and I would recommend that. She's a very good writer. And there's also Cathy Unsworth, The Old Blackmagic. On top of this, there are numerous documentaries that have been made, both amateur and professional. There are BBC broadcasts. There's one from 2014 with Steve Punt, did one on Bella. There are so many websites. These are just a handful of the books that are out there. There are T-shirts now printed with Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm. And as I said, people tend to forget, it gets swallowed into popular culture, and people forget that this is the death of a young woman, and we probably won't know who she is. So in summary, The victim of the murder, often referred to as Bella, is unknown. People being killed by the bombs in Birmingham and going missing all the time. So she could be a spy. She could be somebody local. But the fact is she was murdered. And the fact is the murderer will never be caught. It's highly unlikely that they will ever catch, unless they can find her body to actually identify with DNA, as the skeleton has gone missing. So we may never know the truth behind this story, but I hope that's given you an insight into the various theories and ideas and dispelled some of the myths that are out there. It's a story that is now assigned to local legend, to local folklore, but it is fascinating. And there's a lot written about Joseph Jacobs if you're particularly interested in the espionage angle, but Bella does crop up quite a lot. But sadly, we'll just never know who she was. Thank you for listening. And are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Louise. That was really interesting. Thank you. And on the doorstep as well. So fascinating. Yeah. I can't believe that they lost her remains, though. That seems unbelievable.
It does in this today, because there would be a whole chain of custody with the different parts of the investigation. That picture there, by the way, is what a wych elm would look like in full leaf in spring, but the actual tree that she was in has been long gone. It was pulled down very soon after.
Ah, and that's the question from somebody: is the wych elm still there?
No, it's not. It's yeah, it was felt that it was already quite a decaying tree anyway. Obviously it was hollow in the middle, that's how they managed to put her body inside it, but it was felt that it shouldn't be on the estate anymore, so they decided to uproot it.
Mm-hmm. Audrey asks, did her clothing give any indication as to her class if she wasn't in disguise?
Well, from all the notes that I've read, it seems that she was probably working class, because the assumptions were that she was a barmaid or she was a prostitute, or there's no indication. I mean, her work in her shoes came from a market in Dudley. There's no indication that she was anything other than working class.
Okay, thank you. Deb Curitan says, thank you for another wonderful lecture. I was wondering if you have done any collaborative work about this with Rob Francis, who wrote his book Bella, about Bella in the Wych Elm.
No, I haven't. And he is somebody I should contact, really, because I think he's given talk for you, Paula, at some point.
Yes, in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah,
yes.
So maybe I'll touch base with him, but I know his was a more either poetry or fictional account, I believe, based on, definitely based on Bella, though. It's inspired a lot of works.
Okay, thank you. Someone else asks, how confident are we that facial reconstructions are reliable?
I think in the case of this one, we're fairly confident that one, I mean, I've seen some awful reconstructions, I have to say, over the years. Yeah, there's some which you think nobody could even look like that. But Caroline Wilkinson is world renowned for her forensic construction of faces. And like I said, she was tasked with the reconstruction of Richard III's face from his skeleton when they found that in Leicester, under the car park in Leicester. So we do feel that that's probably the closest we're going to get to what Bella looked like.
Okay, thank you. Amy asks, has the area where she was found changed much since, or are the woods still mostly the same?
The woods are mostly the same, and Hagley Hall opens to the public, so you can actually walk through them. They're not private woods as such, so there is access and you can go and walk through the area. There are parts of it that I've got to say, I mean, in addition to everything I've talked about tonight, there are also reports of active covens in the area, that witchcraft is practiced in the woods, which you get those sort of stories near any woodland usually, you know, and ghosts and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, parts of it are quite dark and spooky, but you can, when Hagley Hall's open, you can go and have a walk around. Witchbury Hill is public footpaths and you can walk up there too.
Okay, thank you. Someone asks, what do you think it is about the story that has captured the public imagination so much?
I think there are three things that happened with this one. First of all, it was a murder. It was in the middle of war, and it kind of didn't really hit the public imagination to start with. But when the graffiti started to appear 6 months later, people started to really take note and start to question, well, does somebody know about it? Is this the murderer who's putting these messages up? Does somebody know who did it? So that started to spark the imagination. It is intermittently featured in the press. So then in the 1950s, at the height of the Cold War, James Bond stories were starting. These stories of espionage then started to emerge. So it grabbed the public imagination again with these tales of she was a spy, she'd parachuted in, she was aspiring, operating just in Hagley of all places, just on the outskirts of Birmingham. Again, it started to die down. Margaret Murray, previously had already mentioned the witchcraft aspect. Then we've got Donald McCormick talking about devil worship in the press and publishing his book in '68. So then that brings up the whole idea of, is this witchcraft and devil worship perhaps, and a whole new imagination. So for different reasons, it's constantly been in the public imagination. And I think the fact that we don't know who she is complete mystery. The way she was found, she's stuffed in a tree in the middle of some woods in quite a rural area. And she's distinctive looking, why was she not found? And the fact things have gone missing, I think it's just a lot of mystery surrounding the mystery.
Yes, thank you. Kyle asks, is there a memorial to her anywhere? It seems deeply sad that there are no remains and no name.
I think there have been attempts to get a memorial for her at various times. I don't know whether there is one in the woods. I know there was a lot of local pressure to get something, because it was felt that, she's a girl, somebody was murdered there. And as I said, with all the, T-shirts and badges and all the rest of it, somebody was murdered and her body was in that. And the fact that everything has disappeared, it adds to the mystery, but it also dilutes the fact that she was murdered. But I'm not aware that there is at the moment.
It is very sad. Maria says, do you know of any other examples of bodies being put in trees in the UK or overseas?
Yeah, there have been some accounts. Again, this is what Margaret Murray brought up in 1945, that bodies were put in trees to contain witchcraft. So if somebody was believed to be a witch after they'd been executed, sometimes they would be encased inside a tree to try and contain their spirit. But I haven't come across many cases at all. I think this is quite unusual because trees generally aren't big enough to actually insert a body into. And even this one was quite small. If you look inside a Wych Elm, it's very confined, but she was only 5 foot tall. And as the coroner said, he felt that she was put in very soon after death because they would never have been able to get her inside if rigor mortis had been set in.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie says, not a question, but she thinks the end of the crossed out paragraph in the letter could be, did he return to Birmingham?
I wondered that. I've got the letter here with me, and I stare at it frequently to try and decipher those last few words, and it infuriates me. So please, the letters are on the Worcestershire Archive website. You can access them. They're on several other websites. But if you can, I've got it here with me. I've got it printed very large, and I thought it could be Birmingham. There was this, did he return to, but I can't work out the 2 words before that or whether it is Birmingham at the end. So yes, possibly, but keep trying. And if you do come up with something, that would be great.
Fantastic, thank you. What were the illegal tests you believe they wanted to try to run on her?
Well, this was that was documented. I think when they realised that, when I say legal tests, she had the post-mortem with Professor Webster. So Webster did the post-mortem and announced that she had had a child, that she had been suffocated. It was murder. But then her bones were sent for further tests. Now, we say they're illegal because they weren't authorised by anyone. Webster just decided to send to a colleague at the university to run further tests, but we don't know what they are. He just documented that it was for further tests.
Okay, thank you. Do you think Bella's story will continue to be heard by future generations, or will it phase out of history?
I think it will be heard, but my concern is, as with many of these stories, because there is no substantiated fact, or very little substantiated fact. I mean, what I've presented is bare bones of a story, really. My concern is that it won't phase out of history, but it will keep evolving and be misrepresented, and over time it will become something totally different to that which it actually is. So I'm more concerned that it will be forgotten about for being something else, not that the story itself will be forgotten. And there are loads of books on it. I mean, don't get me wrong, even today I've recently bought two, you know, it features in a recent publication, Unsolved Murders, and I've got another one which is, what's this one called, The Forgotten Past. So it's constantly cropping up in publications, so I don't think it will be totally forgotten.
Good. Nicola Allen says, thanks for a brilliant talk. Do you think the facial reconstruction will help to reorient the public attention back onto the fact that this was a woman who perhaps deserves more respect than she has been afforded up until now in the popular imagination surrounding the mystery?
Well, the face was, I totally agree with the respect. She's had no respect at all. And even in the 2014 BBC Radio 4 documentary that they put out, you know, is she a prostitute? Is she? And it's all about the negative and almost stereotypical viewpoint of who she might be, which is a shame, because we don't know who she is. And yes, she might have been a spy, she might have been a barmaid, she might have been a prostitute, she may have been homeless, but she still deserves respect for the fact she is a victim of murder, whatever her background. And this crops up quite a lot with women. I know the Peter Sutcliffe murders, that took a long time for the police to give respect to the victims, because they were deemed as prostitutes or living a certain life that wasn't approved of. And it's only recently that they've had apologies and that things have been taken seriously. And I think this is exactly the same. Sorry, I'm sounding like I'm on my soapbox now, but I do find it really frustrating. Whatever her background was, she is a victim of a murder. She was murdered brutally in 1941. That's the bottom line. And she does deserve more respect. The facial reconstruction was issued in 2015. It had a little splash at the time. And again, it's now resigned to the occasional web posting, which, yeah, it's really sad.
Yes, it is. Amy says, not a question, but just wanted to say thank you very much for your lecture. It was incredibly interesting and I enjoyed every second.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that.
That's lovely. So I'm just keeping an eye. Oh, another one here from Chelsea. Very interesting talk. Thank you. Do you know where there are ever any other similar cases, not the tree part, but the fabric in the mouth?
It was often used for for suffocation, but, usually it was stuffed. There are cases, yes, there are cases. I can't recite them off the top of my head, but yes, there are cases of people being murdered by asphyxiation, by having fabric put into their mouth. I haven't come across, because the same as Bella, because the fabric that was put inside her mouth, it appears to be exactly the same as that which was on her undergarments, which was, she had a kind of underskirt on, which was peach taffeta, and it's peach taffeta that was found in her mouth. So we will never know if she was assaulted, if it was a gag, if it was, they used her own clothing to asphyxiate her. And it's difficult to even try and imagine it, really, because the only facts we know is that she had fabric in her mouth and she's skeletal. So we don't have anything else. No trauma was found, other than obviously being pushed inside a tree, but that was post-mortem. But yes, there are other similar cases, but not that I've found that are exactly like this one. Quite unique.
Yes. Other than the supposed witchcraft connection, why do you think Donald McCormick combined the two cases in his book?
He's not the only one. They were very close together. Bella's body was found in 1943. Charles Walton was murdered in 1945. There was the supposed witchcraft connection, but they also took part, one in Warwickshire, one in Worcestershire, probably 25 miles apart. So they would have been quite high profile cases. Donald McCormick also cites the fact that Margaret Murray drew the connection between the two, even though he claims to have met her, but she died before his book was published, so we'll never actually know that. There are a lot of critics of Donald McCormick, and again, he's no longer with us, so he can't defend his work. But a lot of people say how much he put in that was unsubstantiated. But I think it's purely these two cases happened in quite rural areas where you wouldn't expect this level of crime to happen. And that's why combined, it was a good seller. People are fascinated by these kind of murders. And again, Charles Walton's murder was not solved either.
Okay, and another thank you from Andy R. Really informative as always.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you for that feedback. And nothing else in the chat, I don't think. If anybody's got anything else to ask.
If you do think of anything else, as I said, please don't hesitate to email me, louise.fenton@wlv.ac.uk.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Louise. There's nothing else coming through at the moment, so just a thank you so much from Audrey. So I don't think there are any. Every time I say I don't think there are any further questions.
The thank yous.
Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for attending again and listening to another story from the macabre history that we have around us.
Yes, thank you ever so much, Louise. That was fascinating as always, really interesting. And that local element as well just gives it an extra element of interest. Margaret Walker says, brilliant, thank you. Look forward to reading your books, Louise.
So do I. They are actually coming close to completion. So hopefully I'll be able to do a book launch before too long, maybe the end of this year.
Oh, fantastic. And Amanda says, please consider keeping these lectures on Zoom. I'm watching from the USA.
And that is one of the huge benefits of doing these, because if I was in a room, we wouldn't have anywhere near as many people or the global audience that we have. So thank you for coming along.
Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you, Amanda. And we have people from all over the world, particularly for Louise's lectures. So that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much again to Louise, and thank you very much to everybody who's attended tonight. It's been another brilliant lecture, and we look forward to Louise's next lecture. No pressure, Louise. And we've got a series of humanities lectures that are being advertised on Zoom at the moment. So all sorts of different subjects. And we've got 3 next week. So if you want to keep an eye on our University Centre Telford Twitter page and our Facebook page, and we'll be getting together with Louise to look at some more lectures, I'm sure.
Definitely.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to Elena in the background, who's provided the technical support from the events team at the university.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you soon.
Bye-bye.